Well, you've just come back from Israel, but let me just ask you, what would you list as your foreign policy credentials?
Well, I think as a governor, it's really ultimately about leadership. To me, in my lifetime, one of the best presidents when it comes to foreign policy was a governor from California. In my lifetime, one of the worst presidents when it comes to foreign policy was a freshman senator from Illinois. So I think it's not just about past experiences, it's about leadership. As a governor, you have to put a cabinet in place, and hopefully you pick people as smarter than you on any given topic. I think that's something that's required of a successful president, is putting people in place, be it Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, and others, and then having the good sense to listen to them and to others, and the chain of command in the military, consulting with the Congress. All those sorts of things I think are important of a president, and I think successful governors in either party have to do that every single day, consult with people in their cabinet and act. The most beyond that is, as a governor, I've been to just recently in Germany and Spain and France. Earlier in the year was the United Kingdom on trade-related missions, a few years back in China and Japan. So that's probably the most that any governor of either party has, is that experience in terms of trade relations, and something I think is very important, not just to our states, it's important to our country.
That was Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker on Face the Nation with Bob Schieffer this weekend. He also went on to say that President Obama and Hillary Clinton, between them, have left the world in worse shape than they found it. And he said just about everywhere Hillary Clinton has played a role with this president under Obama, that part of the world is largely a failure, a mess, because of what we have seen from Obama and Clinton. And the governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker, joins us now. How are you, sir?
Hey, Sean. Great to be with you. I'm doing well.
I knew you were away because I was trying to get an interview with you, and I wrote you a note, and it came back auto reply: I am in Israel and the Middle East. See you later. No, something to that effect. How was the trip? I saw pictures with you and Prime Minister Netanyahu. How was that trip?
It was great. I mean, just being connected with the Prime Minister, it felt like, in fact, a number of people afterwards said they somehow thought we had known each other before, because we hit it off well. Obviously, they do their research. They knew my comments about Iran and the concerns I have with the president's proposal. They had heard about the effort that I had stressed about how the American people want to have a renewed relationship with Israel that's a positive one as an ally, and not what we say today under President Obama. But probably the most interesting thing for me was not just meeting with the Prime Minister and leaders in the Knesset and others. It was literally this past Monday being up in a helicopter all day going around the country, from Jerusalem to the Jordan Valley up to the Golan Heights. We literally landed and got out and saw Syria, and then could see Lebanon off in the distance. To think about the Islamic State and Hezbollah being that close, then getting the helicopter going down to the Sea of Galilee, over Nazareth, over to Tel Aviv, and then down to Gaza, and getting out again with Israeli soldiers and seeing just where things had occurred even the last year, and to see the threat. I mentioned this over the weekend in Iowa. A couple of the national press kind of were put off by the way I said this, but in areas like that, I can see how people there are living day to day in a way that's very similar to how we as Americans felt on the day after 9/11. They run the risk that when the siren goes off, literally within seconds, they have to head for cover because they don't know.
If anyone's critical of that, I can tell you, because I was there during the war last year. And it is I think you were smart to go there, because you get a very different perspective on the ground than you do just watching on television. And we went into the tunnels. We were on the border of Gaza. When we got off the plane, we heard the sirens going off.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very different reality that they're living there. And of course, the size of the country, it is a very, very small country. And it is.
At one point, we were literally on our way back to Jerusalem. We were hovering. They went high up in the helicopter, and I could see on the east the Dead Sea Basin, and to the west I could see the Mediterranean. Actually, it was kind of cool. They pointed down where we were hovering. We were literally over the place they believed that David slayed Goliath. I mean, think about how amazing that is. But we were looking there, and you can see right there in a helicopter up in the air. You could see how close the threats were, from Hezbollah, the Islamic State, down to the problems in Gaza, and you can just see why they are so concerned. And when people bring up a two-state solution, and again, I've said as well after being there, certainly it's not the time for that now. They need defensible and secure borders, and they're a long ways off from having that happen.
Well, I got to tell you, all these questions come about Iraq and the aftermath of Iraq, I think a question ought to be put out, and I think this goes to some of your comments. Hey, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, are you sorry that you pulled out of Iraq too early, which now has allowed ISIS to build up and take over cities, let's see, Tikrit and Fallujah and Mosul and now Ramadi? I mean, these are cities that Americans fought, bled, and died for. And because they pulled out precipitously and they pulled out without a plan and they didn't keep intelligence forces on the ground and training forces on the ground, Americans went there, bled, and died for what?
Right. Well, I take this question a step further. I think you're onto something that not only should that be the question, but specifically, what would they say? What would either of them say to the families of American service members, particularly those who made the ultimate sacrifice, that today many of them feel like that sacrifice somehow was made in vain, which is just a horrible thought out there. But it's not just about whether we should have gone to Iraq in the first place. And I defended the President Bush, that is, saying that I think any president, regardless of party, with the information they had available at the time, would have made a similar decision. I mean, heck, Hillary Clinton as a senator voted for the authorizing resolution out there. But that aside, so the surge worked well. I give him credit for that. But the real problem today, the more immediate issue, is how do we clean up the mess that's been created by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton?
And this was the admonition of George Bush. He said, if you pull out too early, that we're going to be back. The enemy's going to be far worse. And this is it. This was their decision. And one of the problems, I think, Governor, when you really think deeply about this has now happened in two major wars. We lost 58,000 Americans in Vietnam, and we didn't finish the job and win the war. And then the war in Iraq became politicized by people like Hillary that voted for the authorization for the use of force in Iraq. And as a result, this was land that we had won, that Americans died for. And by pulling out because of political reasons, and remember, she was running for president in 2008, we now have ceded that land to the most brutal terrorist group on this earth. Now, I think they've got to be held. If Jeb Bush is going to be asked the question, and you're going to be asked the question, and we're going to relitigate this decision from back in 2003, then we need to relitigate the decision to pull out because we had this territory, in my opinion.
Well, and it's a much better precursor to where we go in the future, because the problems that we see emerging moment by moment, minute by minute in places like Iraq today are only going to further evolve in terms of the disastrous path this president's heading with Iran, in terms of the problems we're facing with Syria, that we've had in Libya. I mean, again, remember, when Gaddafi left, the failure for the United States government to stand up and have any presence there opened the door to the madness that's happening there. You see, I mean, just on issue after issue, our inability to lead is having an impact. About a month ago, I was meeting, brought a number of folks in on national security, but I brought a group in of leaders in the Persian Gulf states. So it's not just Israel, the Persian Gulf states, many of whose governments were represented this last week in Camp David. And I asked them, set aside the Iran deal for a minute, what's the biggest problem in the world you face today? You know what they said? The disengagement of America. The disengagement of America. And this
Scary.
is something that is so frustrating.
That void is being filled by people that we don't want to have fill it.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is not just a partisan issue. Think about the proud tradition of this country, not just with what Reagan did when I came of age in the 80s. I mean, think back to Harry Truman. And think about if Harry Truman had a different view of after World War II, how much different the world could have been. So this isn't just about Republican or conservatives. We have consistently had a strong American view of the world when it's come to foreign policy, and this president has backed away from that proud tradition.
Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the Middle East as it relates to the Iranian threat. Now, the president was snubbed this past weekend with his summit that he put together, and people that did come were less than enthusiastic by the president's assurances that he'll snap back into place sanctions that he's going to lift. And, you can't snap back $50 billion, a signing bonus that you're giving the Iranians, or giving them, according to the president's own words, a breakout time. In 11 years, they'll have the bomb. So I'm watching a new Middle East alliance build between Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the Egyptians. And I think they all believe that the president's weakness now is destabilizing the region and likely will now cause a nuclear arms race.
It's exactly right. I mean, they're ready to jump into that. It's what we said all along, the irony of ironies. I mean, I think part of this is this president falsely somehow believes he needs to fulfill the prophecy of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee and do something now that he was, proclaimed to have done before, when just the opposite. Not only are they making a mistake with Iran, they've opened the door to even greater nuclear proliferation within that region, which will create not only chaos there but around the world. This is one where I still hold out hope that somehow this deal will not come together. I've said if I were to run and be president, this is one of the first acts I would take on day one is to pull back from this. But it's like putting a genie in a bottle. You can't put all the sanctions back in. People ask, would you do a deal? I said, yeah, on our terms, not on theirs. I'd say you've got to dismantle your illicit nuclear infrastructure. You've got to disclose, and by disclose I mean absolute transparency, inspections on demand, no more underground fortified facilities or things the president said in the last few years he wasn't going to allow and still allowed under this agreement. And then actually be in a place where you start dealing with others in the region, not just with Israel, but others in the region. Iran, you look at again, I mentioned that helicopter. Think about not just Iran where it's at today, Hezbollah, that is Iran. The Houthis in Yemen, that is Iran related. That is Shiite related. Look at the mess in Iraq. It's not just the Islamic State. It's the Shiite militias there, and in Libya, there are problems all over the world that are connected, all over that region, I should say, that are connected to Iran, not the least of which I talked to Netanyahu about this and others. You've got intercontinental ballistic missiles that aren't just about taking out Israel if they're given a chance, dipped in nuclear capacity. These could be directed to the United States. So this is one where it is a huge mistake for this president to go down this path, and God help us if it's not too soon to stop it.
Let's talk a little bit about what your intentions are, where you are in this process. And it looks like everybody's jumping into this race. Now we have, George Pataki's talking about getting in, and I think Governor Jindal is now making overtures that he's going to get in, and even Lindsey Graham. What do you I know you're on a different time frame in part because you have a legislative session that doesn't end till what, June or July? Yeah, the end of June is when historically our state budget is completed. That's my most important duty as governor is to see that through, and I'm going to fulfill that obligation to the people of Wisconsin. But it should be done the end of June. We're on track to do that. I'll be making my intentions known shortly thereafter. But obviously I feel passionately. I love this country. As frustrated as I am with this president, with our standing here domestically and around the world, I love America. I love the people of this country. I think we can do so much better with the right leadership. I just saw over the weekend Joni Ernst, and I'm so excited when I think about Senator Ernst and Cory Gardner and Tom Cotton and all these other great new reform-minded senators there in Washington. I think about a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican as the president, ideally one who doesn't just fight the good fights, but who has won them, who has won those fights time and time again, and that's part of the reason why we're paying so much attention. Let me ask you. I would make an argument to you that the Republicans have a math problem as it relates to the electoral map, and I would argue that Hillary Clinton, if she didn't show up for one debate and she didn't answer one question, would probably garner right now 47% of the vote. That's how divided the country is. But when you start out without California, Oregon, Washington, New York, New Jersey, maybe not Pennsylvania, and you got to run the table and get North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, Virginia, and then either New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, Iowa, New Hampshire. It's a difficult map for Republicans. These are hard states to win historically. How can that map be redrawn? Well, I think you take a page out of something I wish we had done the last time, and people like Kasich in Ohio and I and Terry Branson in Iowa had mentioned this to our nominees campaign, and that is go into those states you mentioned, states that today, almost all those states you mentioned have Republican governors, and tell people, in many cases, Republican governors they just reelected in 2014, even though they're tough battleground states, and say, remember how bad your state was before your current governor? Notice how much better it's gotten? Imagine how much better America can be if you put a good, common-sense, conservative, reform-minded governor in the White House. And I think that you can make that case. I was born in Colorado Springs. I think you can make the case in Colorado. I've seen it with Cory Gardner. I lived for a while in Plainfield, Iowa, a small town of 450. I think you can make the case. You see it with Joni Ernst's election. I think you can make it, particularly in the Midwest, from Iowa to Wisconsin to Michigan to Ohio. And as you mentioned, you poll in Florida
and a few of those other states, I think there's a compelling case, and I think good common sense Republican reform-minded governors who have led a positive conservative reform, a comeback in those states, have shown that if you connect to the people who elected them, you can connect to enough voters to win those states in the presidential election.
All right, Governor Scott Walker, thanks so much for your time. Glad you had a great trip. Appreciate you being with us.